So my name is Pablo Rojas. I am co-chairman of the Let's LAC regional platform. I would firstly like to begin thanking the Race to Zero campaign team, SlowCats, ITF, and the rest of the organizers for being able to bring in this session to all of you. Some of the housekeeping rules about this session. So we will be having the Q&A function in the Zoom. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments you would like us to read aloud in the question and answer section at the end of the panel, please do not hesitate to leave your questions and comments in this function. The questions that are not addressed during the session will be also noted by the organizers. And please keep an eye out of the session recordings in the near future. They will be available on the UNFCCC website for Race to Zero dialogues, and also we will be sharing it with you among several social networks and social accounts from the organizers. So to give you a little bit of background about this session, building a climate neutral and resilient world remains as urgent as ever. Collaboration between parties and non-party stakeholders such as businesses, cities, subnational regions, investors, and civil society is and will be essential to drive forward systems transformation and promote high ambition in all stakeholders and building back from the COVID-19 situation we are all. The Race to Zero Dialogues is a series of virtual events that are convened by the high-level champions for the global climate action, Mr. Nigel Copping from the UK and Mr. Gonzalo Munoz from Chile. These dialogues are taking place between the 9th and the 19th of November 2020. The dialogues will chart how entire sectors are already rapidly transitioning to a zero carbon future as defined by the climate action pathways. So expanding on the theme of building back better after the COVID-19, the Race to Zero dialogues will make sense of the journey of to net zero by homing all these sectoral pathways. In this context, so the dialogues will bring actors together and will help partners and public in general to better understand the ambitions of non-party stakeholders, explore the specific actions for each transformation needs, and deliver the delivered ambition. We are now in the third day of the Race to Zero dialogues, and today we are having the transport section. So in the past 2 days, the dialogues have focused on health and industry, and we are having all these events all around the world with really a lot of participants, a lot of high-level panelists as well. And today is the day of transport. The objectives of the transport dialogue are to show to the transport sector that the objectives of the Race to Zero are really achievable. For instance, a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that prevents future threats, creates decent jobs, and unlocks inclusive, sustainable growth is deliverable, is achievable, and is real. The other objective of the transport dialogue is to demonstrate that non-party stakeholders are already meaningful progress, and they are making some progress by demonstrating this progress to the specific transport subsectors and regional examples as well. And to illustrate the pathways to zero to 2050 with a special focus on what actors are needed to do in the short term, but also thinking long term. Since early Asia time this morning, the transport community have been discussing all over the world how to win the race to bring transport emissions to zero and how to draw a roadmap to decarbonize the transport sector by 2050. Before our session, there were several regional sessions focused on Asia and Africa. And right now, as you know, we are focusing on Latin America and how to deep dive these thematic sessions. We are going to talk a little bit of e-mobility. We're going to expect a little bit of discussion regarding these important panelists we have today. So in today's session, we will take a regional-wide look at economic and climate benefits on transitioning towards a zero-emission transport in Latin America and the Caribbean, and how the COVID-19 has contributed or inhibited this transition to the region. We will also hear from policymakers on the ground the challenges faced in creating an ecosystem of actors toward e-mobility and how to navigate those challenges. We will be listening to the work and going to learn a little bit about the groundwork different sectors are doing, deploying e-buses and the type of partnership it takes to achieve the zero transport urban mobility in Latin America. And also we will hear from the transport authorities in the region, as well as some innovations and best practices from different cities all over the region. Lastly, our panelists will discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic crisis could provide an opportunity for a better metropolitan transport governance that prioritizes lower carbon transport activities and more equal transport services. But also the pandemic has bring us a lot of new challenges and a lot of new problems. In your screens, you can see the panelists we have for today. And we are trying to firstly show you a little video that the Minister of Transport and Telecommunications from Chile, Her Excellency Gloria Hutt, pre-recorded for us. I'm not sure if it's going to work, so we are going to try it out. And yeah, so let's continue with that, please, Talia.
In our cities. Also,
okay.
Sorry. Good afternoon. I want to thank the International Transport Forum and SlowCat for inviting me to open this Race to Zero dialogue. Race to Zero is an objective that we all share and is also a key element of our transport policy in Chile. We are trying to improve the quality of the air in our cities and also focusing very strongly in improving the quality of public transport modes. We think that public transport has a key role in improving this quality of life. I was asked to summarize our recent experience with electromobility in Santiago de Chile. We started in a very small test of 100 buses, and we facilitated from the government an association between manufacturers, energy distribution companies, and an operator. They all, the three together, did an agreement, and using the existing contracts, proposed a way that we accepted to finance the fleet renewal. So we started with the first 100 electric buses in the city. And the experience was so successful that it started to increase. And two other similar associations were created, and we also supported these associations. And by the end of year 2020, we are going to have in operation in Santiago 750 electric buses. We are very proud of this achievement because it opened a very clear path to change the bus fleet. We also changed other diesel buses, old buses, for diesel Euro 6. So in both ways, we are improving the quality of the air in this city. We are also improving the quality of buses in the rest of the country. And along with the electromobility, we brought high standard to our passengers. And we brought buses that offer air conditioning, Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi while you travel, USB chargers for the cell phones, LED lighting, a beautiful interior design. So we are making the public transport more attractive. And on top of that, with zero emissions and with no noise. This is a very concrete way of improving our cities and giving comfort to the users. Hopefully, we are going to repeat this process until we change the whole fleet. We have now a bid open to renew 2,000 additional buses. Most of them should be electric by next year. So we have now lots of material to share and lots of experience. This was in the middle of existing contracts. So we had to use what we had on our hands. And that was very important because we found a way to make a major change without major change in the contracts. And that allowed us to facilitate these associations. There is a second element that appears more recently that will also increase or improve the quality of air in the cities and will reduce emissions. And that comes from COVID-19. COVID-19 has been a very sad experience in the world, but also brought opportunities. And this opportunity is located in cities, in the possibility of reformatting the way of allocating the space to people, not to cars, to pedestrians. We need more space to get the distance between individuals, and that space is in the road space. So we are reallocating roads to pedestrians, to cyclists, for example, and also to other activities, to restaurants. We are using the city in a completely different way. And that is the beginning of a major change. It's not just a response to the needs of COVID. It's a way of using our urban areas in a completely different manner. Hopefully, we are also going to share this experience with other countries, other cities that are more advanced than us. We are completely open to share our experience with the buses as well. So hopefully you will have a very productive journey in this meeting. And I hope that our change and our experience with the electric buses and also the interventions that we are doing along the country with these needs that COVID brought will be useful for other cases. Thank you very much and have a very successful day. Thank you.
So we would like to first thank Mrs. Gloria Hutt. She's the Minister of Transport and Telecommunications from Chile for this pre-recorded video. Initially, she was going to join us in person, but unfortunately, a last-minute commitment was for her, and she was no longer able to join us. We thank her anyway. So right now we are going to move on to the panel discussion. The following panel will address the challenges of adopting transport decarbonization measures during and post the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. It will also highlight success stories on deployment of zero-emission buses and why there is a business case for them in the Latin American and Caribbean region. We will have several panelists. I will be introducing them one by one. We will be doing a first round of introduction, in which each one of the panelists will have 3 minutes to present themselves and to give a couple of initial messages. And after this first round of introductions, I will also be giving the panelists some of the questions we have already prepared to them. And also, I wanted to remember and to remind all the participants that we have habilitated the question and answer function in Zoom. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments for our panelists, please go ahead, do them, and we will be reading them in the following time. So firstly, I would like to introduce you to Marcelino Madrigal. Marcelino Madrigal is the Principal Energy Specialist from the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. So go ahead, Marcelino. We are listening to you.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and everyone for the invitation to this magnificent panel. I think what I would like to focus in my first remarks is to explain why zero carbon transport technologies like electromobility make sense, especially in Latin America. Given that we have an international audience, I think it was good to mention why Latin America is these technologies are key. And I will start by quickly mentioning the economic benefits, going back to the basics. You know, an electric car has 80% efficiency, an electric bus compared to 20% of a diesel or a gasoline car or vehicle. So you lose 80% of the energy that goes into a conventional old technology bus. And this is economic efficiency, and especially important in Latin America, where the leading sector consuming oil is the transport sector. We have made all kinds of analysis at the Inter-American Development Bank, where I lead the electromobility group in the infrastructure sector. And just to give you an example, in the CARICOM region, just putting in place, you know, policies like incentives to make sure there is parity between electric vehicles and conventional vehicles can bring you 2.2 billion of benefits in a period of 20 years. In Jamaica, an all-important economy, even a modest, target of electric mobility, like reaching 60% of the buses being electric, can lead to benefits of 2% of the GDP over a period of 10 years. Why? Because in the case of smaller countries in Latin America, oil is the main bill for the government. So the benefits are dramatically high for many of our economies. Environmental benefits, and I think this is where also Latin America has a very big advantage, is that while our transport sector is more polluting per GDP, as compared to OECD economies, we emit 80% more emissions than other regions, because our transport sector is rather inefficient and consumes a lot of oil. We have an advantage, which is our electricity, is rather clean compared to the other regions in the world. Latin America is one of the cleanest in average electricity mixes, like 380 grams per kilowatt produced, compared to 500 grams of CO2 in Middle East or in Africa. So we have this tandem of polluting transport sector, but rather clean energy mix. The region has cracked the code, I would like to say, on how to produce clean energy very cheaply. Renewable prices of $20 in Brazil, 18 in Mexico, also around the same numbers in Chile. So that makes a clear, perfect match to feed electricity into the transport sector and decarbonize. Globally, we have seen in Latin America that if we want to achieve zero emissions, transport is key, and we see that electricity in transport is going to be fundamental. Just to give you an example, our analysis indicate that by 250, 21% of transport in Colombia needs to be electric, 43 in Peru, 53 in Argentina, 66% in Mexico, and 100% in Costa Rica, which is one of our champions in the region. But electrifying transport is key to reduce emissions. It makes economic sense, and of course there are lots of local benefits, pollution, as the Minister of Chile mentioned. This is very important in Latin America. Why? Because Latin America is the most urbanized region in the planet. This is important to mention to the international community here in this event. 80% of the people in Latin America live in cities. So all those benefits from lower pollution will immediately get to lots of people. Job creation, no need to mention, and with this I close my initial remarks. Even the International Energy Agency has recognized that in the transport sector, the two most job-creating opportunities right now post-COVID is the construction of pedestrian bicycle lanes. First, linear infrastructure creates a lot of jobs. But second to that is deploying electric charging infrastructure. And that's really surprising. You see that pedestrian and electric mobility is the key to economic reactivation in the transport sector, and electric mobility infrastructure, for power utilities are really investments that in their size are not really not doable. It just requires the appropriate legal framework to be deployed with a lot of potential. So I wanted to give that overview on why in Latin America, economically speaking, environmentally speaking, globally and locally, electromobility really makes much more sense than in any other regions in the world. So I leave it at that and my initial remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelina. We will get back to you with some interesting points you have already mentioned. But now I'm going to give the word to Mr. Edison Bros Urriola. Mr. Edison is a Panamanian lawyer. He's environmentalist and politician. He currently serves as a member of parliament, independent, not affiliated to any political party, and is the proponent of the first ever national bill on electric mobility, which is currently under discussion in Panama's parliament. So, Mr. Edison, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pablo, and thank you to the panelists and for the invitation. It is my pleasure and honor to be here and voice the needs of a younger generation who is conscious about climate change, because we are the generations and the younger generations, the ones that will be more affected by it. And it is definitely the greatest challenge of our world. This COVID era has been a disaster and has been a tremendous damage for pretty much everyone. And many businesses have gone bankrupt, inequalities have been exposed, including the bad air quality, especially in poorer areas. And but also there is opportunity for transitioning to a more sustainable urban life and to a more sustainable transportation. And in Panama, we are pushing a legislation on electric mobility as part of that sustainable mobility that has been introduced into Parliament a year ago, and we've been under intensive consultations, and it's given us tremendous hope that we can get people and stakeholders on board to get together to commit and to elaborate a plan for the country that could also be replicated, and we can also learn from experiences from other countries that have gone further already. The framework that we are discussing right now in Parliament includes regulations in terms of infrastructure capacity requirements, charging stations, tax incentives and non-tax incentives, some concepts that we're defining by law, and even updating previous policies, which is an interesting part of the discussion, how every expert has different perspectives. And although they all are very passionate about it, we need to get to come to an agreement. We all need to seek what we really want as a common vision for the country, including in the government, because this is an area, an opportunity to have people from different backgrounds working together, but even though they're part of the government, we're part of our parliament, we don't all have the same vision. So this is an opportunity to try to build coalition, try to team up with other stakeholders, and especially with the people. It is very important, especially for parliamentarians, to get the people to know and to understand why this is important, why a parliamentarian should devote time on developing something like an electric mobility bill, that it doesn't, it gets done overnight. It takes time. So it is crucial to explain to everyone how this will impact their lives, because electric mobility and sustainable mobility in general, it goes way beyond selling electric cars. It's about infrastructure, it's about boosting research and innovation. It is about updating different policies and also pushing important renovation in terms of how the country is being powered, in terms of increasing the renewable sector, and even complying with international agreements that our countries have already agreed upon. For instance, the Paris Accords, where Panama has already pledged to increase its share of renewable energy to 15% by 2030 and to 30% by 2050. So these talks are very important, and it is highly crucial to get everyone on board, to listen to everyone's perspective, to make it as open, as inclusive as possible, and to explain how the post-COVID recovery plans need to include sustainability. It needs to include prioritization of issues like mobility, because climate change is the greatest challenge that we have in the world. And if we don't act now, it's going to be late. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Edison, for your words and for all the work you're doing in Panama. Great. Now I'm going to pass the word to Miss Carolina Chantril. She's from the Asociación Sustentar in Argentina, and she's the Sustainable Mobility Working Group Manager. So Carolina, please go ahead.
Thank you, Pablo, for introducing me, and to the organizers of this session to inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm honored for that. I coordinate the Transport Working Group for the Let's Partnership for the regional platform in LAC from the association that I work for. And what we do facilitate is spaces and dialogues in ways in which our community members actually could exchange ideas, best practices, and learnings from their experiences. Now, actually, we are starting a new collaboration with the Euroclima Plus program to expand and synergize these efforts. And for a few years now, we've been engaging with practitioners, decision makers, academics, some of them like the panelists that are today here, that work in electric mobility as means for cleaner, low emission and resilient transport systems in many cities and countries of the Latin American and the Caribbean. It's been 3 years now since we created a community of practice in this particular topic. And let me tell you some things that we've seen and learned from this community. Don't take this as totally representative of the region. It's just to give you an idea where we think are headed to. Basically, we've seen from the cities that are engaged with us, many of them have already, they show interest in pursuing electrification of their public transport systems, more in particular in buses and BRTs. Not only that, but that's the most frequent topic. And from those, a lot of them, I would say half of them, are already implementing and operating buses in many different scales. I would say half of the ones that have been this year engaged with us are doing that. And that goes from pilot scales to, dozens of buses operating in their systems, or larger operations, such as the one in Santiago de Chile that Gloria was telling us about. This means that the region is already building its knowledge about the technology, the infrastructure, the buses for performance, including the batteries and the charging systems, and it's starting to figure out standards for the operation and seeing what's adequate for their own systems and models. There are many good learnings from these experiences, both in the selection of the technology, the purchasing and designing adjustments to accommodate these electric buses and systems that are already operating. However, are only a few of them, and I would say from the ones that are involved with us, only 10 to 15% of them have already defined a financing schema or for the investment as well as for the operation. And as I said, this is not necessarily representative. So if we take the whole universe of cities in LAC, probably this is more marginal than what I'm saying. But this is not new also. Financing is the most frequent one of the main barriers for this kind of transformation, as expressed by many of the actors, such as operators, local agencies, including the financing institutions. And I'll let Marcelino to correct me on that if that's wrong. But basically, another thing that we notice is that there is still a lot of work to do on the regulation side. Basically, many of the cities do not have any regulation in place for either any of the components of the electromobility system. This means that there are just a few or some cities that have regulation on vehicles, a bit less on energy use, prices and infrastructure associated, and almost none for the regulation of the operational models. So I think there are a couple of examples that we already listened today that actually are doing progress on those matters. Just to finish, there are a lot of things that we can learn from the current experiences, particularly how in each city there is a few or a few actors that actually take the lead and finds ways to collaborate among each other to better design what models to adopt and evaluate for adequacy in terms of financing, operation, and governance. I will be happy to discuss further these aspects and highlight some of the cases that we've seen in the region. So thank you, Pablo.
Thank you, Carolina. And we will definitely go back to you with these topics as well. I would like to introduce you now to Sergio Avelleda. Sergio is the Director of Urban Mobility from the WRI, the World Resource Institute, Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. So go ahead, Sergio.
Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much thank you ITF and Slowcat for the invitation. I'm so honored to be here. The question about to eliminate emissions on transport is the most important item in the transportation agenda according to the climate change challenges. But I want to add one point, especially after this or during this COVID crisis. We are observing around the world, and especially in Latin America, that we are losing public transportation market share in our cities. We are losing passengers. It was occurring before the crisis, before the social isolation measures. Different reasons in different countries: lack of investment, level of service in the public transport, competence, ride-hailing competence, incentives to buy private cars in different countries, for example, in Brazil in the last years. It results that we were facing an important financial crisis in the public transport sector, especially on the buses. After the crisis, after the COVID, this crisis is completely exacerbated. Every day here in Brazil, I'm in Brazil now, I'm living in DC, but I'm spending this quarantine period in Brazil. We are learning about bus operators going to bankruptcy. 3 weeks ago or 1 month ago, I read a news from Rosario, Carolina in Argentina, saying that the public transport system is going to the collapse because they don't have money to pay the operational costs. So first of all, we need to put in our agenda actions to protect, to survive, revive, and thrive public transportation. Because if we focus only to replace diesel for batteries, the risk is to replace empty diesel buses for empty electrical buses. And one important way to stop this negative cycle and to start to attract riders again is to invest in the quality of services, not only on the electrification. Unfortunately, batteries alone cannot bring reliability, time travel, or information to empower users to manage their travels. So it's important just right now to focus on infrastructure, to bring dedicated lanes, bus corridors, to increase reliability, to increase time travel, to reduce time travel, sorry. At the same time, you need to invest in ITS, in technology, to improve efficiency, to reduce costs, and technology can reduce emissions as well. But the main goal for the technology is to empower users to manage their trips. Third point that is very important, fair integration, reduce costs for riders and increase riders. São Paulo integrated its fare on 2004. It was a revolution on public transport. Much more people start to use buses because they spend less money to use buses. When we integrated this fare integration system with bus, trains, and the metro increased more than 50% passengers on 2 years without new lines, without new stations, only with this fare integration. Institutional design. We have a lack of institutional design to manage public transportation, especially in Latin America. We don't have, for example, good metropolitan authorities managing in an integrated way the public transport. And started to improve, to bring on our cities mass mobility as service. Some routes where we have low demand, we could replace fixed routes or fixed buses for mobility as service. If we do it, we will break this negative cycle and we will increase riderships. At the same time, of course, we need to work with electrification. I think the main barrier on Latin America to accelerate electrification, we are observing amazing projects. Santiago de Chile is a very good example. How to do it, how to accelerate e-bus adoption, how to change business models to allow, to find solutions for financial barriers, for example. Bogotá and Medellin, they are doing a very good job. In Brazil, we have only pilot projects, a small quantity of buses. I think the main task is to find a way to solve the financial barriers, to invest, to find a way to have investors to buy these buses in a different way that we are doing in general. It means we need to have strong financial solution, large funds that will promote large procurements to provide large quantity of buses. It will move all the industry, the manufacturers, the distributors, the utility companies, the bus operators, and it will move these business models to hire bus operators in a different way. We use in general in Brazil and Latin America the same model, that is, we hire bus operators to buy the buses and to operate the buses. It requires a long-term contract. It brings a large risk, capital risk for the bus operators. In general, bus operators, they don't have good design, good institutional design to access good credits, large credits. If we split the concessionaires between assets owners and bus operators, we can split risks, we can reduce risks, we can improve the competitiveness between bus operators to dispute these contracts, and we can really create large scale that will reduce costs for electric buses, and that will create a complete chain to provide technical assistance, to provide electricity, everything on this. And of course, we have a lot of challenges to make it feasible. For example, guarantees. But we have many cities in Latin America that they have a central, a smart fare system that can allow these funds to access the revenues, the fare revenues, direct to pay the buses. So this is my first thoughts to emphasize that we need to put in our agenda just right now, priority for public transport, to increase ridership, to reduce this financial crisis, and start to work with large financial solutions to bring large procurements to really change the bus operators, thus e-bus industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. And lastly, but not least, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Dionisio Gonzalez. Mr. Dionisio is the Director of Advocacy and Outreach from the International Association of Public Transport. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to listen to Sergio, how the nice way he promotes and defends public transport. And of course, it's also a pleasure for us, for the International Association of Public Transport, to take part in these Race to Zero dialogues with such a great panel. Thank you for inviting us. As you may know, and following the kind invitation of Gonzalo Muñoz, the high-level champion for climate action in COP25, UITP is the only transport organization to join the Race to Zero. Through our members, 1,800 members, authorities, operators, and industry in more than 100 countries all around the world, we are committed to be net carbon neutral by 2050 with the necessary support. Countries around the world have been impacted by the pandemic. Sergio already explained the key role that public transport has been playing, like always, really committed to the communities they serve. And now we have a great opportunity to build back better. We can put in quarantine air quality with 7 million premature deaths, according to the World Health Organization. We can put in quarantine climate change, needed road safety, still with 1.3 million deaths per year. All in all, we can put in quarantine the Sustainable Development Goals. And a key part of this needed transition is strengthening the key role of public transport, the backbone of urban mobility, as an enabler to other economic, social, and environmental metropolitan objectives. At UITP, we love working with facts and data. The economic benefits of public transport are 5 times higher than the money invested in it. Public transport unlocks positive effects in the wider economy by connecting people to their jobs, to their study, to their leisure occupations, allowing for clustering of activities and business development, improving quality of life, supporting tourism, etc., etc. Worldwide, over 13 million local jobs are linked to public transport services. For every direct job in public transport, 2.5 additional jobs exist in the supply chain and the local economy. There is a recent study by the United Nations and the International Labour Organization suggesting that employment opportunities would indeed increase by the promotion of public transport. Stimulating the use of public transport by doubling investment in public transport will create additional 2.5 million jobs in the transport sector and 5 million if we consider the overall economy. 1 million of these 5 million in Latin America and the Caribbean region. If we are to limit the increase in global temperature to 1.5% as per the Paris Agreement, we must cut global emissions by 7.6% every year. This has been already outlined in UITP Declaration on Climate Leadership and requires more ambitious national commitments and targets to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. At the same time, the shift to a zero carbon future is underway. It would create good jobs, decent jobs, driving sustainable growth, building resilience, and protecting people's health and a better future for all of us. As highlighted again by my colleague Sergio, we are not talking only here about technology, but about geometry. The battle in cities is for urban space. In addition, there are a number of aspects already commented also by some other panelists. The scenarios for deep decarbonization imply a significant transformation of the transport sector, necessitating far-reaching spatial planning measures, integration of land use and transport, infrastructure deployment, institutional reforms, removal of regulatory barriers, etc. I think we might come back to this during the debate. At the same time, it's also unrealistic to assume that we can procure only e-buses by 2030, even with all the necessary support in the leading markets, due to the inherent challenges in the e-bus deployment market. What is needed, and is needed from now, is a strong political commitment at the local and national level support to scale up public transport, including e-buses, and ensuring that the required finances are in place through a specific mobility funds, earmark taxes, or congestion charging scheme. This will not only provide strong benefits to our cities, but also strong signals to the market, which is quite important. Governments are the key actors to facilitate this inclusive transition. Let's please stop declarations and let's start declaring actions. I will leave it here for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dionisio. I would really want to emphasize the last thing you said, the importance about stopping declarations and starting actions. That's what we really need right now. So to the panelists, I would ask you also to use your raise hand feature in Zoom if you want to intervene, because now that we have stopped or finished our first round of introductions, I will be giving you some questions, but are really open. So in order to make this really dynamic, if you want to also answer the questions I'm going to ask, please just raise your hand and I'm going to give you the word. The first question I have, and I go back to Marcelino, is, Marcelino, you were saying that Latin America has a really relatively clean electricity matrix in most of the countries. We have a lot of hydro energy, also wind energy, etc. And also you were telling us that it is Latin America is the most urbanized region in the world. So, well, perhaps we can think that all the conditions are really good and the economic and the climatic benefits are really clear. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Most of the countries are still we're still whole lot to do regarding the public transport and the electricity. So what are the obstacles? Why is it not better in the region?
This is a very important question, Pablo, and so we see tremendous success in some countries. You see that in Chile, in Colombia, and other smaller countries moving. So when you think, what is it that they have and what barriers have they been able to surpass to make this possible? And I think it goes back to a set of issues. It's not only one. And one on top of many, I think is really the institutional structure in the transport sector. You know, to be able to massify and to structure a business model to deploy this technology, you need a good institutional structure in the transport sector. And that's what you see in Chile and in larger cities in Bogota. So when you have integrated operators, as Sergio said, they have the regulatory craft and the institutional capacity to pull out these deals more easily. So definitely, I think a barrier is one, the institutional setting of our transport sectors. We need more organized systems that are more capable of surmounting this challenge of setting up a business model for the buses. You know, and we're trying now to speak, because we help in Chile, we help in Colombia with bidding documents, reviewing, providing comments to make sure those instruments are financeable. But when we go to smaller cities and you tell a small operator, look, now you will not own buses. For them, like what? I mean, that's what I do, right? I go to the corner shop, I buy my bus, they finance it, and then I drive and I have a job. So it's not as simple with electric mobility because the technology is different. And that brings me to the second barrier. I think it's awareness. We need to find a way. And I think this is one way in which the pandemic has not helped, because we were seeing really a tremendous positive impact of bringing people to Bogota, bringing people to Chile so that they see the bus. It actually works. You just learning the technology is not too complex, but when you see it for the first time, it triggers a lot of questions. So, and it's just awareness of the technology and the true barriers it has, because I think it has much less barriers than we usually understand. You know, electric buses have moved, have circulated millions of kilometers in Latin America, so they work. You just need to understand what is the difference. And the difference basically is that you have a fuel tank that is smaller and you need to refill it much quicker or much with more frequency. So you just need to integrate that into your operations procedures. But, you know, even the experience of Chile tells that, you know, batteries have lasted more than everybody thought. So really technology is there, it works. The thing is that it's different. So really helping operators understand the technology, how it works, which is a barrier that can be removed quickly, is important. So institutional technology awareness barriers and a good business model. If you put all those things together, then financing can move much more easily. And we're working on that at the IDB. You know, we finance the first, you know, electric mobility efforts in Costa Rica, the national electric charging infrastructure. We are helping now the city of Guatemala to hopefully build the first electric bus system in Central America, a complete system in the city of Guatemala. But we're seeing this barrier. So financing is going to be key because governments have many competing needs. And one is key, yes, to sustain the bus systems is key. So when you have competing needs, to keep up this momentum, you need to bring more financing. And we're working on that together with our partners, bringing climate financing. We're trying to structure a big e-mobility fund that could, you know, help many countries in the region so that they don't stop the efforts to move towards electromobility, but we accelerate. Definitely there are challenges, but this is a time where political action, cooperation, and climate financing will be key to take advantage of this momentum. I really see that on the positive side, you know, policymakers really are thinking that we need to restructure our relationship with nature. So I think that that political will is really moving into action. You know, bidding processes have not stopped in Colombia, have not stopped in Chile. So I think some of that is already becoming concrete action. So I just think we need to work all together to make sure that action does not stop, given the really big challenges government have in terms of financing. So bringing the private sector is going to be key, working on institutional aspects of the transport system in awareness and the business model. So I'll leave it at that, my second, you know, intervention.
Okay, yes, thank you, Marcelino, and thank you for your clarity. All were really good points. I wanted to get back to Edison. Edison, you were telling us that the role and the importance of these younger generations and all these climatic activists. So from your perspective as a young climatic activist who is now in a national parliament position, what do you think that are the challenges to create an ecosystem of actors toward e-mobility in Panama? And what can the parliament do to facilitate this transition?
Thank you, Pablo, for your question. Well, there are multiple challenges when it comes to act, when it comes to making progress on something. The first one is bringing people together, bringing stakeholders together, bringing society and the ones who are interested to participate in that and have the right balance between the environmental and the economic goals while creating some manageable level of disruption. That's a difficult balance. And that's something that takes time, which is the other challenge that I would point out, time, because time is looming first to tackle many of the world's issues and the world's goals that we have already, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. We are 10 years ahead from it, and we need to start acting now. But acting, it goes beyond saying, oh, we want to make this happen. So actually, like getting people together, making a coalition and trying to get political will and trying to convince different actors within the public sector to have a common goal and a common vision, that takes significant time. And it's a work that has to be done behind the curtains because it does take time. It does take time. So I would say those are pretty, obvious challenges that we have. And then to build the ecosystem, because it doesn't only translate into getting people who are interested in developing this idea, but getting them together, trying to raise awareness within society, public outreach, education, training, doing all the marketing, getting society to know the positive externalities out of these policies, that takes time. And partnering with different stakeholders, bringing people together from the government, the NGOs, private sector, electric utilities, academia, researchers, scientists, and civil society as a whole. So it takes time, but there are ways that we've done throughout this experience to make it happen. We do have weekly virtual and in-person meetings, which are very, very important to get people to know each other. And I want to express how it is very common when building a public policy to have at the first call lots of people attending, and all of them want to talk, and they're very passionate and say, hey, we know this issue and we want to reach this goal. And it's satisfying to hear them all, but that needs to sustain over time. That needs to sustain on all the several meetings and intensive work that comes ahead. So that is kind of, it is a challenge, but there's also an opportunity to work hard and trying to maintain that momentum and maintain that enthusiasm within the population and within the actors. To conduct public consultations, I think, and I'm convinced, Parliament is a primary platform for open discussions, for inclusive discussions that involve people who are in the field, people who research about this topic, and people who only want to give their inputs, because it is important to have technocrat and technical inputs, but it's also important to have civil society and community knowledge as part of the process. It is important to work towards compromise and common vision. So when we're discussing this policy, and especially a bill, there are many thoughts, many reflections. So it is the challenge on how to translate that into a law, and to what extent everything that has been covered needs to be covered on a law. Because in terms of public policy, not everything has to be within a law. There are some things that can be widened in different norms, in other regulations that do not require Parliament to approve it every time it has to be updated. So that is also a challenge. And that is why this multidisciplinary forum is highly important, because you have people who are pretty technical on things. You have lawyers who are pretty technical on building legislation. You have civil society who say, okay, these are the consumers' problems. But how do you articulate that? How do you build a public policy? That is a challenge, but it is an opportunity to also find solutions within the process. I also believe that being results-oriented is important. Trying to pass from talking to action, trying to get people together, trying to get them to commit, trying to get them to have deadlines and say, by this deadline, we need to get to this percent. By this other deadline, we need to get by this other percentage. That is very important. And it doesn't only involve people in the civil society, but also people in the government. The government has different agencies. The government has key actors from ministers and ministries. So you want them to act and to be part of the process, but also to comply to deadlines in order for the policy to advance, to comply with the deadlines and be filing the dossier, which is another part of setting a parliamentary platform as part of a primary source for building legislation. Why? Because all these discussions that we have for hours, it gets recorded within the legislative dossier. All these positions, people, whether they agree, whether some don't agree, like all this gets recorded and filed within the legislative dossier. And that complements and that builds the dossier and makes it not only legitimate, but its scope, it's important, because in order to advance and in order to get to that right balance within economic and environmental goals, people need to commit. not all actors will get 100%. But if we get them to come into agreement, to come into terms, that's a great way to advance and to try to make it happen. So I would summarize it saying there are several challenges: getting people together, raising awareness, getting the people and the population to understand why parliamentarians should devote time on this, and how this policy will impact positively their lives. And well, yeah, those are the challenges, but there's tremendous opportunity by working together, taking the time and acting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Carolina, you were telling us of some of the challenges that you were identifying and that you were working in the community of practice that you are leading. Some of these challenges are, or most of the challenges are pre-COVID, but right now the COVID situation and the pandemic situation has also maybe modified some of them, or even make them stronger and more difficult to deal with. So can you tell us a little bit of this, how the challenges that you were saying before have somehow changed or remained the same in light of this situation?
Yes, thank you, Pablo. So first of all, I have to mention that when we talk to the practitioners and decision makers of the community of practice, we all acknowledge that most of the challenges that the public transit systems are facing, and in particular in transforming it towards a cleaner system with electric buses, or even, you know, transitioning with other fuels like cleaner fuels or Euro, you know, better Euro technology for diesel buses. We all agree that the challenges are pre-COVID. I mean, most of them are, they were existing challenges. We had challenges in covering costs for operation. We had challenges for, you know, facing investment, like higher investment costs if we want to, you know, upgrade fleet or infrastructure. And I would say that all the other challenges that I think I mostly agree with the panelists, what we said, you're right, regulation challenges, governance challenges, collaboration and articulation with the actors that need to be involved in the process. Those are all the same challenges. What COVID brought us, I think, it's, of course, I think the financing part is like the most affected, and I don't want to repeat what my colleagues already said. It's just that, you know, as there are many, actually there are a lot of studies, and I know one of the IDV from the infrastructure division that, you know, the institutional arrangements for operating public transit systems are were already at burden because most of them actually depend on subsidies and, you know, support from the government, and, you know, subsidies to in many ways, but like the most known one is to the fuel. So how we start thinking how we can start changing those models into ways that are more sustainable, that I think that's the biggest thing to think about in terms of like long-term and innovating in this in the systems. The other thing is, I would say that, and of course, during the pandemic, we had a lower demand because of the restrictions and the social distancing, and that for sure it's not helping. And as I think Sergio said, we need to bring back again people to use the public transit in order to make it sustainable and to actually deliver the benefits and the positive impacts that public transit has for our cities. But on the other side, I think the pandemic brings some opportunities. I heard operators to talk about this, that at this time, maybe there are opportunities to actually plan and think these phases of either piloting or implementing some of the new norms, even if they are not regulated yet, but start testing how those works within these operational models and within the governance and the institutional arrangements that we had. Especially because I honestly and I personally don't believe that there is one solution that is good for all. I mean, in terms of the technology, I think that's the most straightforward aspect to figure out. But of course, cities are not the same. I mean, the geographies are not the same. The demand for each route and system is not the same. Climate, it's not the same. But then what it's actually once you can pilot that and you can figure out that, you know, the technical aspects and the infrastructure requirements, the hardest part is just to bring people together, as Edison was saying, to agree on what are the terms to work together, a system or a model that will allow to actually move forward this transformation. And as I said, I don't think there is one solution that it's good for all. And there are ways, you know, as we've seen in Bogota, they separated the operation model into, like, you know, the providers of the vehicles and the concessionary for the operation. But then we had cases, and I'm glad I seen in the Q&A some conversation going on Montevideo and Uruguay case, where actually something that I think it's a great practice is to allow some time and dedication to look at how it's being financed, the system right now, and what's the subsidies structure, to figure out how we can maybe reallocate some of the funds that are now subsidizing diesel buses, for example, to subsidize the investment for the electric buses, which is like the, you know, the upfront cost for buying the buses. I think it's one of the first things that the operators might bring up in the conversations. And I think that there is a huge opportunity at this point to work with the operators when the demand is lower, maybe, and try to figure out what things we can agree on to, you know, develop these pilots. I think I agree with what Gloria said in her exposition at the beginning, that, you know, the pilot is actually a great opportunity to figure out technicalities of the project, but it's actually a much bigger experience, an opportunity to bring the actors together. And I've seen this also in Buenos Aires. They had this agreement with a couple of operators and the energy company, and they are working out ways to define what are the scenarios, possible scenarios to define that operation model later. So I don't know, I don't want to take too much time, but I think those are key elements that we need to take into account and provide time, as Edison was saying right before me, to figure those things out, because it really takes a lot of effort and dedication for the local agencies, and also to allow the questions, right? Like allow doubting, allow creating that awareness takes a lot of time. So thank you for the time.
Yes, thank you, Carolina. Just wanted to update the panelists and also the participants. We are finishing this panel in 10 minutes because we have the video that we were going to show you at the beginning. They already have figured out the technical issues. So for the next answers, I will really appreciate if you can be really short and really precise. So I've got a question from the public to Sergio regarding the PCT, the personal carbon trading scheme. Do you think the personal carbon trading scheme should be used as a raising awareness solution or tool for the population?
Thank you, Pablo. Absolutely. One important point that I think it's an important barrier to incentivize mayors and politicians to act against climate change is that people don't perceive that they are contributing for this very dangerous situation for the planet. Everything that we can do to share the risk awareness about climate change it's important. It's the same, for example, on road safety, when we are working to create the risky awareness about speed. People in general, they don't have conscious about the speed risk. It's the same about carbon. I had some meetings with different mayors and politicians, and in general, they don't perceive that it's urgent, that it will really change the quality of life in cities. So when you contribute to each person in city, growth the awareness about carbon emissions and the risk of climate change, I think it will contribute to incentivize policymakers to accelerate actions to reduce emissions or to eliminate emissions. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you, Sergio. And Dionisio, going back to you, you said very strongly that we should stop declarations and start more actions. What is specifically the role of actors like the International Association of Public Transport to make this happen?
We are collaborating with different city associations
Dionisio, excuse me, we're not hearing you well.
Can you hear me now?
No. No. Okay, so I'll give you 1 minute, and maybe in the meantime, I've actually got one question for Ignacio Simon from Uruguay, who has joined the panel. He represents MOVES. And the specific question for Ignacio, and I will ask him to turn on his camera. Okay, thank you. Ignacio, how do costs for electric buses currently compare with the diesel buses, and how do you make the economics work during this transition?
Pablo, can you hear me all right? Yes.
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. And thank you, Carolina, for what you were mentioning. I think that in the Uruguayan case, we actually took advantage of many of the things that were mentioned here in this panel. Here in Uruguay, we have 98% renewable electricity of renewable origin and clean. So that's very symbiotic with moving electricity towards transport. And at the same time, we have other preconditions, particularly the existing subsidy for diesel buses. And when the realization that we had is that if you took the subsidy for a diesel bus for its whole lifetime, that amount is more than enough to cover the price difference between an electric bus and a diesel one here in Uruguay. So what we had to do was to re-engineer the subsidies and payment systems, but actually no one is paying more for an electric bus here, neither the government nor private transport operators, but they are getting an improved bus. As in Chile, we took this opportunity to, make mandatory low floor and air conditioning and all those features that improve the service characteristics, but for the same or less expenditure. So I think that actually what we had to do was to rethink the system, but not put more resources in it. It just was to reorient all the flows of funds through the system. I'll leave it there just for sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignacio. Dionisio, is your microphone working now?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, great.
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. No, the question was about how UITP is collaborating and working together with different mayors and ministers all around the world to make the case for public transport. And indeed, what we are trying to develop is what we call the mobility champions community. Yeah, we have a number of mayors and ministers in different parts of the world that helps UITP to convey our messages in favor of sustainable urban mobility. So we collaborate, we give them some examples from different parts of the world. Of course, we take advantage also of their very good case studies to help other countries and other cities in different parts of the world. For us, indeed, this is the focus on mayors and ministers, mainly on mayors, because it's where Sustainable Development Goals will be localized in the future is key. Yeah? I mean, you can have strong common visions, you can have an effective governance and agile regulation, you can have even a solid and stable funding framework. But if you don't have an ambitious political leadership, you do have a problem. Yeah? And there are more and more arguments to motivate mayors to put people at the heart. And the very good thing is that with this crisis, people do support these type of measures regarding the use of parking space for public transportation, the new bus lanes, enlargement of pedestrian areas, etc. So there are many different surveys all around the world pushing somehow mayors to go into that direction, which is relevant for them since they are subject to elections every 4 or 5 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dionisio. And I have one last question that is targeted to Edison. Edison, they're asking that you as a legislator, how do you choose to prioritize e-mobility among many other climate solutions, and not just climate solution, among many other important topics that the Panama is facing right now?
Thank you, Pablo. The bill on electric mobility is part of a broader agenda that we do have in our office, and we also think this particular policy is a high impact one, and it can bring tremendous change in society without dramatically changing people's lifestyle, which is one of the would say obstacles on pushing environmental behavior, this behavioral change. So what you do with electric cars is and electric mobility is not only about pushing and selling electric vehicles or building infrastructure. It's part of a broader environmental agenda that might encompass reducing air pollution, supporting expansion of public transportation systems, electrification strategies, reducing petroleum and imports of oil in the case of Panama, and seizing some of the resources that we have here, and we have a competitive advantage on it, as well as balancing the electric grid. So I believe this is a policy that comes into the right time. This is a once in a generation opportunity for transitioning, for making urban and sustainable mobility a priority, for getting impact, to seize the opportunity that the cost of electric vehicles, batteries continue to go down. So it's an opportunity for new markets, for innovation, and also to tackle climate change. And as Marcelino was mentioning on how we need to convince actors to understand that their actions count. So the only way we're going to tackle this environmental action is by collective action. So it's just like the COVID-19. If we all wash our hands, you'll reduce the contagion in a certain %. If we all wear masks, you'll reduce contagion on another %. If we all have the physical distance, you'll also reduce percentage. But we have to do it all. So every single action counts, and that is very important that we bear it in mind, and that we rethink mobility, and not only as electric mobility, but also as a sustainable mobility that help people to realize how humane streets can have a positive impact for their health, how public transportation can reduce the carbon footprint, how we can comply with many of the targets that the world as a collective world needs to comply with in order to bring about change. And lastly, this is an unprecedented time of disruption. People have already been affected and have already been to switch or nudge into their lifestyle. So we need to seize this moment to push an environmental revolution and to navigate within this environment and government policies to facilitate positive change and effectively improve the life of our citizens. So we need to do it now. It takes time, but we need to act now in order to bring a more prosperous and sustainable world for the future generations that will face directly the consequences of the greatest challenge of our world, climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Edison. And I would like to thank really all the panelists. It has been a great session. Also, thank you to the participants. Unfortunately, as it has been common with all these virtual sessions, the time has come to close the session. We all have to give you a 10-minute video that is already been pre-recorded from my colleague Monica Araya, which is the leading transport for the Climate Champions team. But before passing the word to Monica, I just wanted to tell you that the Race to Zero dialogues will serve as a critical input to the UNFCCC climate dialogues that are happening from November 23 to December the 4th, which are at the same time advancing work governing the rules of the Paris Agreement. So our discussions today can definitely make a contribution on how transport is discussed in the UNFCCC forum in the next following weeks. Please stay tuned from the closing session of the transport dialogue later today, and also for the other activities of the Race to Zero dialogues. Please just check the agendas and the website. All the information is right there. So with this, I am closing. Thank you again to all the participants, to all the panelists, and please just enjoy the video. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.